Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 241. I'm delighted to welcome back onto the podcast. It's been far too long. Louis Cunningham, how are we doing, mate?
All good, thanks, Ben. Yeah, brilliant. I'm buzzing to be back on, to be honest. It's like you said, I think it's 2018 since we were last on. So
Crazy. That's absolutely flown by, hasn't it? I mean, it doesn't seem that long ago, but I know we were just discussing it there, and I think you're in the academy role at Sunderland back then, and not now. So we'll update that in a second. So your role now is different, which I'll leave it to you actually. Louis, can you give us a bit of background on yourself and take us up to what you do now?
Yeah. But this would have been in the podcast before, but I was a student at Teesside University from Middlesbrough. I went. I was also a elite level boxer. I used to represent the country at youth and then senior level across two weight classes at senior level. So my background was receiving high quality sports science support within my sport, and took a real big interest within university, being on like the TAF athlete schemes and things like that, and receiving all that strength and conditioning and being around good facilities and good members of the staff to help me. So decided from a BSc of sports science to take a master's in strength and conditioning. From then went into my first role at Gateshead College, which was in the Northeast EIS, which I was just exposed to loads of different sports, including boxing of my own. So I learned a great deal on that. When I was at Teesside, I just really immersed myself around loads of different sports, the different blue chip companies that the university was linked with, such as like the Teesside RTCs and elite athletes from different sports. I got around Scottish rugby, which ended up taking a job there after the Gateshead College gig. So yeah, went into Scottish rugby within their Exiles Academy. Then started my first role at Sunderland in 2014, which took me to around about 2019, which should have been when we last spoke. And basically at Sunderland, I think I got round every role at the club, to be honest. I was a physical performance coach, and I worked around a number of different avenues within the academy, but had the opportunity, especially with some of the great staff that were around at the time within the first team, allowed me to come up and help them. With Mike Clegg when the club were in the Premier League, and then when they faced relegations and things like that, the first team staff really went down to a skeleton, and they sort of depends on the academy a lot. And Paul Walsh, who's now at Stoke, was leading that up and lent on me a couple of times. So I had great experience and just trying to get immersed in all in different phases within the academy, and then getting around the first team players, and it really set me up nicely. I then moved to Middlesbrough Football Club, which I started off as leader of strength and conditioning within the academy. And then throughout my time there, I got some good opportunities, and I moved up to the first team under Neil Warnock. Working with good practitioners like Brian English and Frankie Hunter and John Thrower, Johnny Madden. Brilliant practitioners there. Again, learning, and then I ended up having the opportunity to come to Norwich, and Chris Domagala, who was the head of physical performance at the time, who was with Daniel Farke as the manager. He came and approached me and said, "Oh, we've got a role here as the leader of strength conditioning within the football club, working with the first team. How does it sound?" And then I just thought, with the way that club's been run, with Stuart Webber, the infrastructure that's being built, the way they played football, they're getting themselves in the Premier League and sort of bouncing in between the two leagues and really trying to establish themselves as a Premier League club and building a Premier League training ground, being innovative with technology and stuff like that. I just thought, what a great environment I can take with both hands to go and learn there. Moved from one end of the country to the other, and it's been hard because I've now got a wife and got a little boy who was born 3 weeks before I started my job. So it was all big challenges, but yeah, absolutely loving it from now on. Yeah.
Brilliant, mate. I love that you've touched on how much research that you did into the club and how many considerations you gave to the role and the people involved in the club as well. Because I think that's really important, Lou, isn't it, for practitioners? Because some people get offered an opportunity and they might just look at like what the league the club are in or maybe the history of the club, and they might not take into consideration too much else. And it was actually something that I spoke to Frankie Hunter about on her podcast. She mentioned this as well. And I think it's really important, isn't it, for coaches to consider that?
Yeah, I think so. And like all the different environments you sort of find yourself in, you sort of have to adapt your practices. I think when you go for these job interviews, a lot of the time they ask, well, what sort of guy are you? What's your philosophy and things like that. I think a big part of your philosophy is where are you at, and then you sort of shape your own philosophy with the environment that you're being put into. What manager's in, what are the constraints in terms of infrastructure and facilities and technology. For example, when I was at my previous two clubs, we didn't have at the time a Forcedex, we didn't have fixed frame dynamometry, we didn't have a 1080 motion, which I have at Norwich. So your sort of principles don't really change, but you sort of adapt. How do you collate them? How do you individualize programming? How do you profile your players? And that'll just change because of the cards that you dealt with, really. So we'll touch on this later on in terms of the profiling. But for instance, I'm using the Forcedex now to profile our players using like DSI and looking at the strategy of how people jump using the different metrics that you get from a CMJ, for example. Where before I may have used JB Murrin's field test of squat jump, loading it differently, and they both tell me sort of the same thing. Does someone need to work on is more velocity deficient, or they're more force deficient, or they're more of a mixed based athlete? But you just have different ways of doing it. One's more gold standard, one's more of a derivative from a gold standard test. So, and just by having them experiences throughout your career, I just think it helps you and it broadens you. And then wherever you do end up, you can just adapt,
Yeah, 100%. I think that's the key word, isn't it? Being able to adapt in any role that you're in any environment. No, that's brilliant, mate. This might sound like a really obvious question, Lou, but the reason I ask this is because you see so many different job titles used now. And it's always interesting to see whether they mean essentially the same thing or there's slightly different responsibilities. So you're in charge now, lead of strength and power at the club, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So in terms of that compared to an S&C coach, a sports scientist, what are your main responsibilities that you have now day to day?
Yeah. So I'm basically, you look at all the different roles that come around. I'm a senior physical performance coach working with the first team, but the lead of strength and power is the derivative of my role and where I lead the provision. So we have our head of physical performance, Glenn Lewis, really good practitioner, and he's the one who's day to day with the manager. He will manage his staff within our department, and then as my role, I have some key responsibilities of lead of strength and power. So basically, what that is I look after the strength and conditioning provision, where it's mainly gym based, but obviously, as we know now, strength and conditioning is not just in the gym. So all the transfer work, which I'll talk to, using like resisted sprints and things like that. But basically, I'm leading the strength and conditioning around the first team squad, but also sort of helping and managing into the academy, just so we've got a real one club approach. And yeah, when you're in the academy, and I've been in them roles myself, things are totally different because of the people you work with. So it can't be too one club, but I think the spine's the same. When you're talking about growth and maturation and competency and things like that they're more lined in with the academy provision. But I think there's certain principles that you can keep solid. But yeah, my role, the strength and conditioning, leading on the injury risk management as well. my role will lend itself to leading most of the profiling that goes on in the club, especially the gym-based stuff, which we'll touch on in a minute. And then in terms of the pre-activation as well, we have daily pre-activation. I'll write and I'll talk about it again in time, but we individualize the gym programs, individualize the injury risk management programs, so they'll have stuff daily to do individually, but we'll get them into the group as a team as well, and do pre-activation and try and stick on the themes of what they're going to do out on the grass to real link in that transference from gym to grass. But in terms of injury risk management, that might go into pre-activation. It might go into minimal dose work across the week where you might not be able to fit in a full gym session. So it's around their individual muscle targets or range of motion or competency, etc. And then the injury risk management might be built into the actual gym program as well, in terms of like hamstring development, for example. So yeah, all them different sort of facets in the club, I will sort of take lead on, and try and develop and push them forward, you know.
Brilliant. I know you sort of touched on it a little bit already, but can you take us through that approach that you take to profiling players?
Yeah. So again, different facets. In terms of monitoring their capacities and physical qualities, to try and individualize the gym program, I'll start with like measuring like the stretch shortening cycle, force time and pulse analysis using the Forcex. So we'll do like CMJs, we'll do single leg jumps, we'll do a squat jump, we'll do some form of plyometric jump, which is mainly the Damien Harper's hop test. And we'll also do a strength test, which is the mid-thigh pull. From that analysis, we obviously have different decision trees, where players will categorize themselves in different ways. So we can sort of group athletes or individualize programming. So we use things like the DSI. So that's a combination of the peak propulsive force within the CMJ, and the peak force that you'll get from the mid-thigh pull. You'll divide them two together. You get a ratio, and then one's more velocity dominant, one's more force dominant, one's more mixed dominant. And I mentioned that earlier with JB Morin's work, and there's been some good work looked at where you look at someone's force velocity profile, and you're sort of, if they're deficient in a certain way, you'll push that end of the curve to try and develop them. And this is predominantly vertical, the vertical force vector. But looking at that basic capacity, you know. Also within the CMJ analysis, we'll look at like their braking capabilities. You know, Harper, in some of his deceleration studies, he's linked you know, deceleration to peak eccentric force. He's linked to eccentric RFD within braking, and that's obviously the downward phase where you haven't really switch on and get yourself off the counter movement. And also linked with, that's something that might fatigue when he's done repeated sprint training protocols, you know, the eccentric will fatigue. So that shows how that might be something measurable to look at braking capabilities. Look at the eccentric utilization ratio, probably not the way that some do, but looking at, I'm quite big on Bosch's work and how he likes to joint couple and reduce that slack within the system, and being able to produce force or impulse or something explosive without a counter movement. So they pretty much want to be bang on together. That's the way I look at it anyway. The squat jump and the CMJs, try and get them as close as possible, and then we can see where the deficient lies as well from them. With the single leg jumps, obviously that's a real good one for our baselining in terms of rehabilitation, because obviously you're going to injure one limb and looking at asymmetry. And we'll look at like all the other things that we look at with the CMJ, like I've mentioned the braking capabilities, the durations, so RSI mods a ratio again, and we look at a combination of like jump height and the duration you are within the counter movement. And then things can also tell you a million things to do within your programming. So obviously at the start of the season, you'll get some good baseline measures, and what we'll do is within all these sort of different tests that I'll talk about now and after here, is we'll Z score them and see where they're fitting within the group, make our own thresholds off Z scores and over time, because you're going to have like, what's the Norwich player? Over time, we get all these different players in, and they leave and they go. But in terms of what we recruit, what is excellent, what is good, what is bad, what is poor, you know. So, and then keeping on to the four-step stuff, using the reactive strength index. You know, Ian Flanagan, that's really good, some good data from that sort of stuff. With he sort of set some boundaries, like, or if you get a 2.5 or above, you're excellent plyometric ability. If you're lower than 1.5, it's something that you really need to work on. We've got to try and make our own thresholds off that, but you know, they're quite similar to what he's probably recommended. But we look at try and make a quadrant of that, and sort of have you got some lads who can produce like the RSI mods, can they jump high, but they're not very quick at doing it, or they are very, very quick in the CMJ, or quick and off the ground and plyometric ability with their foot and ankle, or they've got a combination of the both and they're really good in that top right hand corner, or the both, and then that sort of just that helps your exercise selection in the gym. And that's how, when I'm talking about individualization, we're sort of individualizing through exercise selection at times because of how intensive an exercise needs to be, or whatnot. In plyometric ability, you know, we can really chop and change and target different facets, you know. And then in terms of that transfer work, we look at the force velocity profile in terms of the sprint. There's been some good research coming out with different GPS units, and we use StatSports, and the StatSports unit now can work out a situ, and also if you just sprint at your 30 meters with a protocol that's constrained through our SOPs, you sprint your 30 meters and it works out your sprint-based force velocity profile off the JB Morin's work in terms of Echo, VO, Pmax, what slope are you, what's your ratio force decrement, etc. You know, so we can individualize certain things in terms of their gym program. So like we have the 1080 in the gym, we can take it outside, we do sled training and whatnot, and that'll sort of, we're working along that curve in terms of resisted sprints, sprinting and etc. You know. And then we, in the past, in my first season, it sort of went away this season a little bit because of how congested the period was in the championship and with the World Cup break and whatnot. But we do a lot of like the max velocity and acceleration kinematic analysis. And like I mentioned, really keen on the Bosch work and whatnot. So you know, we use Jonas Dodu, and I know you've had him on recently, and what a clever man, you know, and a great coach he is, and he's done some detailed analysis for us to interpret and add our own, you know, is it a capacity issue, is it a kinematic issue, kinetic issue, where so is it? He talks about projection, reactivity, and exchange, you know, yeah. So. I use probably the Bosch terminologies, which is a similar sort of thing, you know, stiffness, extension reflex, can you whip from the hip, you know, things like that. And sort of when he does his analysis, we can look at, well, what a player's individual deficits are. And like you look at Mendy Gooch's analysis of, you can change someone's max velocity sprinting and it might help in terms of injury risk management. So if someone has an anterior pelvic tilt, for example, we want to be joint coupling and working on that trunk control when they're running, using perturbations and taking away hands and using wickets, or even in the gym using the aqua bags, overhead work and things like that to real accentuate that deficit within the max velocity kinematics that might have been highlighted by Jonas, which me as a practitioner can go away and target that, you know. And then from there, moving on into our sort of like injury risk management screening. We look at we've got a fixed frame dynamometry. We use Kangatech at the club, so we use a mixture of like valve stuff with a Forcex, but we use Kangatech in terms of our fixed frame dynamometry, and it's been brilliant, not just for testing, but for having in the gym scenario and using as a piece of kit to use them isometrics. Isometrics really big at the minute, isn't it? Everyone's talking about it. More Sportsmith and Natera and Lum, and it's really big. So you can do your overcoming isometrics on the Kangatech. It's great, and it gives you feedback, and you can monitor over time. But yeah, we use a fixed frame dynamometer. We do about 10 tests on there and do a big hip profile, knee profile, plantar flexion. We combine that with the ForceDex as well. So we do knee flexion on the Kangatech. We get a peak force. It doesn't have RFD on the Kangatech, it's fixed frame. So we do like the running hamstring specific, quite similar to McCall's work, but also Natera's work, and trying to find an RFD for that hamstring. And again, for something like the hamstring, needs to have good force, but also needs good speed qualities as well. So we quadrant that sort of thing as well. And then again, looking at that hip profile on the Kangatech, adduction, abduction, external rotators, big for jumping and landing and cutting, they're the ones that are stabilizing the knee, them abductors and ERs. And then in terms of groin pain and big injury in football, measuring adduction and abduction ratios. Plantar flexion, all about the foot. You're only as strong as your weakest link, so we need to measure how strong we are with the ankle and foot complex. I think with the hot summer that we had and the World Cup break and the schedule, it's lent itself around the country. We've noticed that there's a lot of stress sort of injuries, tibant and things like that. So that's a big test that I think is quite important for us. We do eccentric measuring with an odd board as well. We measure eccentric hamstring, and that's something. All these tests we build in the gym programs as well. So we're not just profiling and whatnot, but these could be built into the program as well. And because we've got the technology there, we can measure as we train. I think that's more efficient, especially with first team players who, we've got profiling today. If you can get the ForceDex in the gym, and you stick to being rigid within that exercise and your SOPs, you can measure as you go. And then finally, from the fixed frame, the Nord board, the ForceDex, we do a little bit of movement screen, mainly in rehab. And at the start of the season, just to get a baseline. I use a couple of tests in the FMS. We all know the problems the FMS doesn't predict injury and all them sort of things. But I think what it does, it just, if you've never met anyone before and you've got a new signing and you don't know what they're like and you've not had anything from a previous club, it's good for me to just know, can they lunge, can they squat, can they hinge, what they're like on a single leg, what's the trunk control like, all them sort of things in a real controlled environment. I'll do a couple of tests on the FMS, and it just allows me to exercise select. So if someone's got big, massive, long femurs and tight ankles, I'm not going to give them back squat, but I might give them a split squat variation because they've got lunging. And then I might work on their ankle mobility in their injury risk management program, but I'm not going to develop their ankles and I'm not going to change the femur length in a gym program. So I'm wanting to get some good force into them, or some good high velocity force, or go on their individual force velocity characteristics. I don't be spending ages working on their ankle mobility in the gym when I could be working on it in other aspects. So yeah, it just helps me with exercise selection. The Y balance is obviously a criterion-based test. So when people have come back from ankles on the injuries, we might use that as a return in the gym to when they're going to hit their next stage of rehab. So it's nice to have a baseline for Y balance. And then having some form of like curriculum based within the academy and whatnot, which I've used at Sunderland, Middlesbrough, and using sort of a movement classification where they're doing these different movements in the gym and they're sort of hitting the different levels and progressing as they go. But I think that sort of lends it to the academy system because it's more a syllabus based system. But with the first team, you think about performance and you're trying to look at where you can train people. And again, in the background, developing little bits of competency and whatnot, finding where they are competency and loading them, when you can. Because they are adults and the trained adults and the strong, powerful boys, So in terms of profile, that's probably, in a nutshell, taking you around it,
Mate, that information is incredible, mate. Really, really good. You've gone into such great depth there, so I appreciate that. What I'm interested in now, Louis, is just talking about how how easy it is, and also maybe the process of actually individualizing those programs from that point. So you've profiled a player, you've got that information, you've got that data. you've got that sort of everything you need to essentially create the program for the player. And there's probably two questions in this. There's one, that initial creation of the program, and then there's also how that then works throughout a season, because we know it's not just solely about the gym program. We've got games and everything else to be taken into consideration. So how does that then look in season?
So it lends itself to periodization. So in terms of periodization, it's as you know, on a week to week time, it's vertically integrated, where you'll focus on a physical quality throughout the day, and that's horizontally alterated throughout the week. So obviously you want a natural taper throughout the week. Natural taper being intensity at the back end of the week, volume at the start of the week. When you're in the off season, you sort of like trying to lay down them foundations, and you go on that sort of like general prep, which I call develop. Them general preparatory exercises, full range of motion. You know, when I'm talking about the triphasic stuff that we put in, like submaximal eccentrics, maybe supermaximal eccentrics, isometrics, more yielding based isometrics, again full range of motion, the concentric stuff, just like trying to lift heavy through full range, like long and strong. Injury management targets, again long and strong, and trying to hit them quite generally. In terms of the in season, that's when the intensity will obviously raise, and throughout the week you're targeting certain things, but you the exercises are becoming a little bit more specific to what they might do on the field. You know, these so when you talk about that bondage model, you've went from your general to your specific preparatory exercises, which I call maximize. So yeah, he's still probably in full range of motion, but the rep schemes might change, the intensity might lift, but the volume's going to go quite further down, because you've got games to think of, and they'll probably lend themselves to that maximize is probably the end of pre-season, and then when you've got like real good Saturday weeks or international breaks and things like that, you know. In terms of the next phase, I'd call optimize, and that's your specific development exercise with the bondage, and that's where you sort of like you're getting all your transfer work, your coordination work, working partial ranges of motion. When you're talking about the triphasic stuff that we put in, you know, for the eccentrics, it's using like accentuated eccentric jumping and plyometrics, so adding a snap into it, or snap down, or you might be holding a band on your pogos. In terms of your strength work, it's going to be them faster sort of eccentrics using flywheels and working over them real specific ranges of motion. You know, like where you're not going full range, but you're getting in and out of a specific range. Isometrics, overcoming isometrics. Very like the running specific hamstring exercise, or the plantar flexion exercise where you're pushing against stuff. You're really overcoming something, and you're working for speed rather than just for ramping force. You're working for exploding the rack, and then your concentrics, you might start adding like pneumatics and bands to your work, and you're working over partial ranges again. You might be doing partial ranges, squats, split squats, using the Kaiser machines for pneumatics, and really just exploding and whatnot. So yeah, that gym stuff will change in terms of the periodization, and then in terms of when you go in the profiling, that's where you'll start to individualize. So when you talk about how do you measure that sort of stuff, and how do you keep it individualized within the training program, is so throughout a squad, just say we'll stay on the DSI stuff for now. So the DSI is going to tell you, are you force dominant, are you velocity dominant, you've got no deficit, you just mix, and you're going to float through all the full force velocity curve, eccentric and isometric as well. And what you'll do is, for the force lads, you'll try and group them together. The mixed lads, you'll try and group together. The velocity lads, you'll try and mix together. And then you probably, some players you don't chase from a physical quality point of view, like kinetics. You might look at, you know what, he's got a real low training age, I need to just get him strong. Stay on a more general prep. Manipulate the volumes, because I don't want to make him sore for the games and training and whatnot. But you know, he just needs to build his foundations. Or in another case, an older player, I won't mention names from our squad, but like an older player who has had an adductor release, he's got tendinopathy, he's had a hamstring tendon repair, he's got chondral issues within his knee, and like this is one player, and you're like, oh well, there's all these different things that I have to adapt my program to. You know what? I'm just gonna work in the range of motion that he's allowed to train in. I'm going to take this out of the program. I'm going to put this in. I'm going to have a real big injury risk management focus on that player, because the biggest thing for him is not developing his performance probably anymore, because he's in his 30s. It's about availability. And you know what? When he does play, we're a better team. Yeah. So his big focus is injury risk management, But then in terms of the individual programs, we try and keep them similar to their peers within their group, and they come in within their groups, and their groups will rotate. So some will come in first, some will come in next, and whatever, and we have to rotate them because they'll kick off. Oh, why am I always last? So yeah, you're trying to keep them similar, but there's going to be different variations within their own program, and it's about getting manpower on the gym, about education to the player as well, to be able to know what their exercises are. So like when I'm talking about some of the kinematic analysis, yeah, they might all be on a force program, but some might have a couple of tractor-based development exercises to work on his hip lock, for example. So he's working on hip lock, where in another force program, another player, he's working on stiffness because his foot just collapses into the ground. And then in terms of like the plyometrics, there might be a force dominant athlete, but some might be on a low level plyometric exercise selection. Some might be on an advanced, because everyone's got all these different profiles, and it's about having the technology available in the gym, having the interns, having the other performance staff around to help me, because I'm leading the S&C stuff, and they might be leading another provision, but we all help each other out. I get myself on the grass, one, because I love getting on the grass and coaching on the grass, and something I really miss, and I definitely don't want to de-skill in that area, but also I like to help my peers because they'll help me, So plenty of manpower. We'll only have little groups in the gym, and we sort of get around them individuals. The technology works in terms of intent and measuring the principles that you want to get. So if someone's on a speed-based program and we're working on certain thresholds of speed, like your typical zones in terms of like mean velocities of like over 125 or 1.5 meters per second, and or over speed work, and using like the bands to over speed jumps and things like that, and like that, there'd be things that they might be doing. But having the output units there is great, because you're measuring, the player is hitting the right principle because they're lifting at a certain speed, and because they're all on similar things, there's going to be a competition element, because we've got them in groups. They're going to be on the trap bar jump, for example. It's going to be lightweight, and they're going to be lifting for 1.5 meters per second, and they're going to be competing. I'm lifting 50 kilo and I'm getting 1.5, and I've just 1.75, and you only, and they're all competing. It's great. Having the technology around the gym's fantastic, and that helps your principles of training and individualization in that setting for me.
I think the other thing you mentioned before about technology is that importance of utilizing it not just like as a profiling tool so players aren't used to it, but so it becomes natural. So they just think of gym, don't they? Because it's in the gym environment. They just think, oh, this is part of the program.
Definitely. That and like you said, you're monitoring them all the time. Like we use output in terms of our VBT. That links into a hub, and we're just measuring people all the time. You go on the leaderboards and they can see where they're at. And sometimes it can be a bit flawed, because not output's flawed, but in terms of them looking at someone else's flawed, because they might be on a slightly different program, and there might be towards a load for power output, and the others might not have been, and they can't compare some things like for like, but within their own little subgroups they can, and it's great. And you're just monitoring all the time to see where people aren't getting a picture of that athlete, and then when you're bringing into the gym, so like someone, for example, some key components might not change unless it's just like the odd individual is maybe some of the like single joint exercises. So, for example, on a certain period, we might be doing like the running specific hamstring exercise with the Forcex, and we've got the iPads out, and we can see what peak forces and RFD we're hitting live. So they're competing with each other, but I'm getting valuable monitoring data, and also like updated baselines where people sitting within, and it's just like all the time. We've got a real comprehensive data department now in our club, where we've brought in a data scientist, data engineer. We've got a data insights team, and they've all been great with me, like Charles Cullen, Alex Brimage, Emily, and they've really helped me in terms of building these dashboards and having Z scores to where people sit within the group, against all-time players, where they sit within the Norwich player, and then it just allows us to target them deficits to improve play, or even just maintain players as well. So yeah, it's fantastic club with great infrastructure, and it's just helping us all the time to make things better.
Brilliant. I think the other important point you mentioned before actually was when you mentioned about the older player, and it's essentially working out where you fit within their preparation, isn't it? That we don't always have to strive to get players quicker or whatever it is. Obviously, there's a need for that at times, but you have to realize, don't you? And I suppose it's the same approach as what you were talking about before in going into different roles. You've got to look at it and think, this is my tool, this is my skill set. Where do I fit with each individual?
Yeah, no, definitely. And yeah, this is why when I was boxing, I'd have expected an individual program, and I'm shocked to see how many sort of like sessions you'll see that are just on the board, and I can't get my head around that, because I just think, yeah, not every program needs to be totally different, but the buy-in that you get, that it's going to be individualized for one. Hitting people's deficits. If we've been so anal and pedantic on what we're measuring, then there's no point measuring it if you're not going to use it. So just it allows us to really hit the player, and the buy-in you get, that they know it's individualized. And like you said, like you just have that many different players from all different walks of life, at different parts of their career, and they just need to be hit correctly at their point, because it's the cost benefit of S&C sometimes just the cost outweighs it. And like if you go chasing stuff in certain ways because someone on Twitter said you should do, it's like that could be disastrous, because if you lose a player because one is too sore, or you've aggravated his chondral issue and his joint because he's joint compromised, it's not worth it, because these guys run a lot of money, and availability has to be at the forefront, as well as, I mean, I'm a proper performance oriented practitioner, and I work with some unbelievable physios at Norwich, with Chris Burton, Damien Boyer, Mikey Burrows, the three really good practitioners, but rightly so, the physio practitioner and the performance practitioner, as well as Glyn does and Jay So Smith does. We're all butting heads at times in their multidisciplinary team meetings, but we all want the same thing. We all want availability, and we all want to develop performance. But they're coming from a protective side, we come from a performance side, and just by having that nice balance where we might have to butt heads and have a little disagreement now and then, it gets the right outcome, because we all care and we all want what's best, and we all speak daily, one in a formal setting of meetings, and two just at dinner and over a coffee, and we're just constant. When we get home, we'll be. It's bad really for work-life balance, but we'll be talking about a player on a night on WhatsApp or on a phone. Like me and Glenn will just ring each other. What do you think about that today? And it's just like an hour goes by, and little George, my little boy, needs putting to bed. And you know what I mean? And bad thing, but we all care about our jobs. We're dead passionate, and we just want the best thing for our players.
Yeah, brilliant, mate. Louis, one thing I just wanted to touch on before we move on to the quickfire, that information is incredible, by the way, everything that you've covered so far, is just how you go about structuring and periodizing around planes of motion, working players through different planes of motion, how that fits within their program.
Yeah. So we we obviously profile the horizontal work and the vertical work. So we embed that in within the gym program. We embed it within the grass program. We've got like an IDP system at our place where, you know, the data and the innovation team, something that they need to record and see what are players doing. These are the deficits. Are they doing them? And we have these ECM meetings all the time, and we discuss these. And we're all about the individual development plan, a little bit like what academy is like with the HLP. But we so yeah, we individualize. We might be on the grass, and we're doing some of the sled training. That's your horizontal vector. So we combine within a gym program. There'll be some horizontal work in there derived from the profile, and there'll be some vertical work in there derived from the program. There'll be some injury risk, single joint targeted stuff derived from the profiling. And also, depending on maybe what your position is or what you need to develop in terms of like your kinematics, we'll have frontal plane work in there. You know, the keepers, for example, they do a lot of frontal plane work because that's their horizontal, if you like, because they're moving to the side so much. So you try and have them, especially in season, when I talked about like the specific prep rate exercises and specific development exercise, and even like your maintenance with your competition exercises, you try and hit specificity at times, and in season is probably the time to do it. So yeah, hitting frontal plane, using the 1080, using the Kaiser, using bands outside, using the sleds, crossover sprinting, driving to boxes. From a strength orientated, it might be like your Cossack squats, your crossover step ups, your curtsy lunges, all them sort of things. Loading them appropriately with, are they more force dominant, they're more velocity dominant, and that's where they're integrating the program. Using things like the Vertimax as well. Again, 1080 is unbelievable. Like the data that you get back from it, and to real know that you're hitting that sort of principle. For things like your crossover sprints, or you're trying to work around Pmax from your 10-meter accelerations because you want to hit a force deficient athlete in terms of sprinting, the overspeed stuff, and even like the deceleration stuff. Damien Harper's work's unbelievable, and some of the stuff that we've brought in is like that overspeed into a deceleration using the 1080. And getting out as well using a specific pattern, like a crossover or a defending pattern or a jockey pattern or whatnot. So they're having you're really accentuating the eccentric and the braking capabilities in that scenario, and they're having to get out and produce some form of frontal or transverse or different plane that they might be working on. So that's a real big key part of my programming is not just thinking of a lot of the vertical stuff where it's easy to manipulate force velocity. It's the horizontal plane, horizontal force vector, frontal planes, transverse planes, and try and be as specific to movements as possible when it's appropriate to do so.
Brilliant, mate. Absolutely brilliant. Louis, we'll move on to some of the quick fire questions to wrap the podcast up. The first of which is, I know you've mentioned a few people already, but give us a few standouts. Who've been some of the biggest influences on your career so far? That can be people you've worked with or just people whose work you've admired.
Yeah. I think I'll start with the admiring one. In terms of work I've admired over my career, the first person I can think of is when I was in university and I was doing my master's degree, and I was when I was receiving strength and conditioning support. I can remember I wasn't the best mover, and they probably had to lay foundations on me, and a lot of that, like Kelvin Giles, Gray Cook, Vern Gambetta, and like real lane and coordination stuff. And when I sort of entered them academy roles, they really helped me write them syllabuses and competency plans and things like that, because it's all about function before force, and when you're trying to build a toolbox with a young athlete, I think it's so important. And that was probably my philosophy when I first started, and it was like I got really interested into it, and in skill acquisition, coordination, laying them foundations down, you know. So pretty much them at the start. More recently, I think there's been some brilliant stuff out there from Jonas Dodu. I think he's fantastic at what he does. in terms of like the kinematic analysis. And to be fair, I was looking at the kinematic analysis before I stumbled across Jonas. And my first time I stumbled across Jonas was around 2019. He did a workshop at Middlesbrough Football Club before I worked there. And I thought, oh, he's brilliant. And you know, so but I was analysing max velocity mechanics, acceleration mechanics, and he just gave me so many tools, you know, to take away and progress on with my learning. Franz Bosch, big fan of Franz Bosch's work in terms of like the coordination aspect and the transfer and whatnot. And he was probably someone who I studied before I fell onto Jonas's work, and they probably go hand in hand. JB Morin's work with the profiling in terms of the used to use the squat jump profiling quite a lot, and how you force velocity profile and then the sprint profile. It just makes so much sense that you'd profile vertically and then horizontally, especially with team sport athletes that need to jump and sprint. And then I was really, especially in the academy, I was really big on coaching and delivery, because I am a coach at the end of the day, and pedagogy is massive. And Nick Winkelman was someone I really took an interest in, and that implicit learning and working with youngsters and the development around the frontal cortex and everything like that was really, really big. And then now we periodize how you coach within the gym. So like it might be more implicit towards near the game, because you're trying to low cognitive load, and then it's more explicit at the start of the week with things like using feedback on an iPad or whatnot, or you know, so depending on what you do, and that he just gave me so much ammunition in terms of how I coach. Not just I do a lot of different things, I just didn't know why I did them.
Yeah.
And then finally was all the people that I've came across in my career have just been so helpful, and you probably don't realise at the time. You know, when I was at Sunderland, you had Mike Clegg as the head of strength conditioning. Had Adrian Lamb, who was the head of physical performance, and Sam Allardyce, really, really, really good. Scott Ainsley, who hired me. It was the lead sports scientist now with the first team, but was the academy. And you know, James McCarran came in, and he was really big on implicit learning. He was the one who forwarded me on to Nick Winkelman and how to structure a week and stuff like that. He was really big on. And then when I went to Middlesbrough, I talked about some of them: Johnny Madden, Frankie Hunter, Brian English. Brian English has been a great mentor for me. You know, what a guy he is. And then now at Norwich, like I'm just immersed with like top class practitioners. Like one of the reasons why I wanted to go, it was so well staffed, and they bring in specialists to what they want to do. So, you know, when I first arrived, Jay was leading the performance within the academy. He's now with us as a senior physical performance coach. He's class. Glenn was the lead sports scientist at the time when I first came in. But like, what a good practitioner he is. He's learned a lot from Nick Davies at West Ham, and he's just like unbelievable on the grass. And some of his drills, I learn every day from him, especially when I'm taking a player outside for rehab and stuff. I'll use his drills and whatnot. They're brilliant. It's especially like incorporating the ball and whatnot, and getting your principles of training across with the ball and not and stuff. And how he's informed by data, using the Playmaker units and using the GPS, and he's really, really good. Chris Domagala was a good practitioner who brought me in, and I'm really, really grateful to Chris, because he's the one who gave me that opportunity. But another great practitioner, and just some of the management staff I've worked with, like Daniel Fark, now David Wagner. I love working with Dean Smith and Shaky, and then all the managers at the previous clubs, you know, Jonathan Woodgate, Neil Warnock, just all them different experiences. Just you don't realise until you actually get asked the question how much like you've learned from all these different people throughout football.
Brilliant. What would you say your biggest strength is, Louis, as a practitioner?
Imagination, I think. With you know, I'm always getting bantered by the players because I end up making an exercise up, and like they're like, Louis, what's this on our program? It's called and ask another performance practitioner at the club, and they're like, oh, it's one of Louis' exercises. Go ask Louis. Do you know what I mean? So I think my imagination of exercise selection and using principles to link that exercise selection to get what I want out of it, you know, I think that's one of my strengths. I'm a grafter, and I'm hardworking. I'm a coach. I love coaching. I'll try and use as many different styles as possible, depending on who I'm working with. I care a lot, and I'll always put the athlete first. That's probably about it, I think. Yeah.
Brilliant, mate. And then if you were able to speak to Louis way back when in the Gateshead role, like you mentioned before, what would be your top bit of career advice?
I think be patient. I think, and I've had this in times with junior practitioners venting frustrations or interns venting frustrations, and I've like listened to them and been like, oh, I can remember feeling like that.
Yeah.
And what I mean by being patient is, I think every time I've went into a role, and it's that, is it the Kruger model where you like,
yeah, Dunning-Kruger,
and then you get in and you're dead insecure. Well,
yeah,
I'm insecure now, you know what I mean? And I've all 10 years. And but I can remember being at Sunderland and being at Gateshead and pretty much them two, and just thinking like I knew everything, and I I feel like I'm better than them practitioners, and I weren't. Like looking back now, I was nowhere near. It's probably a good thing that I was confident and I thought I was good, but like I was nowhere near, and I would probably thought like, oh, I need to rush and find the next role here and this and that. I ended up doing 5 years at Sunderland, and I learned a hell of a lot and got around like different things. But I think I was just wish I was a little bit more patient and just try and be a bit of aware of my surroundings and try and take as much in as possible, which I think I did. But yeah, I think patience is a big thing, especially some of these practitioners now. I think they should be earning massive money and working, doing the warm up and for Man United in the Premier League, and realistically, like it's not the be all and end all to do that. And just take your time. You're going to be brilliant. Just keep learning.
That's great advice, mate. What is your approach now, Louis, to CPD, continue development as a coach? I know you mentioned a hell of a lot of good people around you, so I'm sure you're learning on a day-to-day basis, but is there any sort of strategy that you take to that now or not?
In terms of strategy, we have a comprehensive PDR process at work, and we need to tell them where we want to be. If they might not be just at this club, it might be in the future. You know where we want to be, and how can the club really help you? And the club's really big on CPD, and also sharing CPD within the place. So if you do ever go on anything, you come back and you present what you've learned.
Yeah.
So that's brilliant. So that really pushes you. I've always been quite motivated anyway. I'll always be reading books. I don't ever read for the sake of reading. I don't understand these people that sit and hold and read, but I'll read sports science stuff, and I'll, from a job. And, if I didn't have to read, I wouldn't have to. I'd watch a film or a book. But yeah, I read a lot from a job. I'll try and attend many conferences as I can. Now we're in North, but we're nowhere near any of your football federation. But
not yet.
I was a regular attender when we were up in the Northeast, wasn't I? So I try a conference as much as I can. UKSCA, Bases, yourselves. If there's any workshops going, I love them. I've seen Jonas do a workshop. I've seen Bosch do a workshop. I think I'll learn off them. The online ones with COVID have been great in terms of conferences and things like that. They've been good. So yeah, I try and do club site visits. It's quite a big thing at our club to go see another site. Like we're building a state-of-the-art recovery centre, which should be done in October. And some of the lads have been going to some of the best training grounds in the country to see like, is ours going to be up to scratch, and what do we need in this recovery centre to make it the best? So like we go around other sites and pick their brains just so we can make our practices as good as others and try and nick ideas and whatnot, So big on CPD. I think it's important, and as soon as I lose the motivation to do CPD, I need to change career, I think.
No, it's a good point. Louis, the last podcast we did went down really, really well. I think this one's going to go even better, mate, because there's been some absolutely incredible information in there. If people want to reach out and they want to chat, they want to ask about anything that we've talked about, where would you direct them?
I've got a Twitter, which is, you'll be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's LP Cunningham with an underscore. But if you type in my name, I'm sure I'll come up. I've got an Instagram. I've tried to do a performance Instagram, which I think you've got. It's called Cunningham Performance, but I don't really put anything on there. I've got a private one, which I accept S&C coaches. I just don't accept random Forex traders. yeah. So my proper Instagram, which is private, if they want to hit me up on there, that's just my name, I think, Lewis Paul Cunningham. And then other than that, LinkedIn.
Brilliant.
Little bits on that. So LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, the 3 things that I go on. And then my email is my first name, lois.cunningham@canaries.co.uk. So if they want to get in touch about anything, feel free to email me.
Brilliant, mate. Louis, it's been absolutely quality. Thank you very much for coming on. It's been far too long, and we won't leave it as long next time. I feel like there's so much more we could dive into with everything you spoke about. So you're welcome on any time, mate.
And it'd be nice to have you down and do a workshop or a conference at Norwich, especially when the recovery centre is built and we can maybe sort something like that out. I think that'd be brilliant. And
let's do that.
Training ground present, and maybe welcome someone from Ipswich or whatever. We'll leave that to you because you're the expert. But yeah, I'll be up for that.
100%. 100%. Let's do it. Thanks a lot, mate.
Thank you.